So that's where he is, because look at verse 1 of chapter 12. 6 days before the Passover, Jesus came to Bethany. Now this is his guest. Lazarus was who had been dead, whom he had raised from the dead. And look who they made the supper for. It's in verse 2. They had made him a supper. And of course, you know Martha. She's always the serving one. And Martha served. But Lazarus was one of those who sat at the table with him, meaning he sat there with Jesus. Now I want to look at the second person. The second person that I believe is completely sold out to Jesus Christ. It could be Martha, because she's serving, and she's always serving. Every time she's mentioned in the Bible, she's serving. But I want to show you the next one is Mary in verse 3. I believe that she was sold out to Jesus Christ. Because it says in verse 3, then Mary, she took a pound of very costly oil of spikenard, anointed the feet of Jesus, and wiped his feet with her hair, and the house was filled with the fragrance of the oil. I want to tell you some of the Jewish customs that come in. Whenever they're sitting at this table and they're sitting at supper, they don't sit down like we do, they recline. They recline on their left side and they eat with their right hand, but their feet are sticking out behind them. But normally the custom is when they come into a house, their feet are wiped with water. Usually a servant would do that. They'd clean their feet because they've been traveling on the dirty roads. They come into the house and the servant washes their feet and gets them ready for the meal. While they're reclining at the table, the women and the servants would stand behind them to where their feet would be. But what this doesn't mention, if you go back and read the other Gospels, you will see that also his head was anointed. Because it was normal custom when somebody came into a house to have their feet washed, but also their head would be anointed right here. And it wouldn't take much, just a little bit. Put a little bit of perfume, a little bit of oil right here. Very, very costly, so they didn't use much. But do you see what Mary did? She took this pound of very costly oil, and not only did she just wipe the face of Jesus Christ, this is what happened if you go back and just study out this. She took this glass alabaster box. It was a box of perfume. She broke the whole thing and put the whole thing on his head and just let it run down. And then she wiped his feet with it. I don't know how much money they made per year, but this was 1 year's salary is how much this box of oil would cost. Why would she do that? I believe that she did it for a couple reasons. First of all, and the main reason is, can you imagine somebody in your family that's been dead for 4 days, they're in their grave, and Jesus Christ walks by and he raises them from the dead, and now he's back with you? They loved their brother Lazarus because if you'll remember, they were mourning and they were weeping when he passed away. And they said, Jesus, if you would have just been here, our brother wouldn't have died. I believe they loved their brother so much they would have done anything to get him back. And Jesus said, well, he's not dead, he's just asleep. He's going to come back forth from the grave. They said, we know he will in the resurrection, but if you just would have been here, he wouldn't have died. When Jesus raised Lazarus from the dead, I believe they would just be sold out to him and they would give him anything right now. So she took this oil and she poured it on him and it went all the way down and she wiped his feet. So what she would do is she would loosen her hair, which they didn't do back then. And this was a sign of humility. This was a sign of abandonment. I'm going to forget who I am. I'm going to leave whoever I am behind. I'm going to humble myself in front of Jesus Christ, and I'm going to take my hair and just wipe his feet. That was a very, very humble act she did, but she would do anything to show Jesus Christ how much she appreciated what he had done for her family. In other words, I'm going to be sold out, whatever it costs. I'm just going to give it all to him. But then you know you've got Judas that says, man, he could have kept that. You could have sold that and given it to the poor. Do you know how much that's worth? In this worldly standard, that's a whole year's wage, and you're going to pour it out on Jesus? You're just going to give it all to him? And let me just make a little reference for this, because that's what he's saying. So many times, instead of you and I giving to Jesus Christ everything, we want to hold back because we might get a little bit more advanced in this world. We might have a little bit more money. The world might look at us and say, look at what they have. Yeah, but I give a little bit to Jesus every week. I give a little bit in the tithe. He doesn't want just your tithe. He wants you. He wants your everything. He wants you to be sold out to him. He wants you to be broken and poured out to his feet, bowed down and just worshiping him. He wants everything that you've got. Why? Because you're not going to be able to take anything with you. When you are passed away and you're gone, you can't take it with you. And like we learned in Sunday school this morning, everything belongs to him already. It's already his. So why do we try to hoard it and keep it up for ourselves? Then the third person that I want to show you about. I want to show you about Judas. Look at verse number 4. But one of his disciples, Judas Iscariot, Simon's son, who would betray him, he said, why was this fragrant oil not sold for 300 denarii and given to the poor? I want to say a couple things first of all about Judas. It was not until this time in his life that you don't hear anything negative about him. Let me tell you what happened with Judas. Let me tell you about his life a little bit. He was one of the disciples of Jesus Christ. He was following them everywhere he went. But do you know what he was doing? He was preaching the gospel. I just read this week some other things he was doing. He was going around healing the sick. We always think of Judas as just being one of the bad guys, don't we? Do you know that he even had the people that he was closest to? Do you know he had them fooled? Because if you read about the Last Supper, when Jesus Christ is around the table, the Last Supper in the upper room with the other disciples, and Jesus basically told them, Judas is the one that's going to betray me, and Judas left. They still didn't know that he was the one betraying Jesus. Why? Because he had them so fooled, they thought he was one of them. For all of his life, he was sold out to Jesus Christ until the end. Why do I say that? Why does that even matter? This is why it matters. We have people out here, especially on TV, that today are healing other people. You have preachers today that are standing in the pulpit and they can fool you. They can make you think they're somebody that they're not. You can say, well, he's just a good person or he's a good guy, whenever their intentions show in the end. And usually it's about money. Because look at verse 6. I'm going to show you something. Judas, he's talking about Judas here. He didn't say this because he cared for the poor, but because he was a thief and he had the money box and he used to take what was put in it. See, now his true colors are going to show. Why? Because he loved the money. What would he do with the money if he had it? Well, let me ask you another question. What good is the money doing him today? What's it doing him right now?